we are going to talk about creating an anxiety plan.
Life's not meant to be hard, it's meant to be lived. I'm Christian life coach April Bragg, and this is the Bragg About Life podcast, where we explore timeless truths that enable us to live, love, and lead with confidence.
All right, everyone. So today I have Christina Adrien, and we are going to talk about creating an anxiety plan. So, Christina Adrien is a licensed mental health counselor, and she holds a Master of Art in Mental Health Counseling and Spiritual Integration from Fordham University. She specializes in working with anxiety, depression, and Christian spirituality. Since 2017, Christina has worked in substance abuse group homes, mental health clinics, group private practice, and started her own practice in May of 2022. In August of 2023, Christina also started her own blog where she provides value on all things mental health and spirituality. And she hopes to continue finding ways to provide value and help to transform the lives of those she sees one-on-one and to those who engage with her content. So, welcome to the podcast, Christina.
Thank you, April. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm just so excited about this because we have that very last line that you said, helping one-on-one and those who engage with their content. That's actually one of my goals too. So that's why we do
great.
this.
Yeah.
All right. So tell me, how did you get into the work of being a therapist?
It started when I was a youth minister. When I was a youth minister way back in my early 20s, I was a youth minister for about 10 years.
Mhm.
And in my youth ministry, I started noticing that many of the teens that I was working with were struggling with anxiety, depression, sometimes very intense trauma. And I would counsel them and work with them one-on-one. But I started noticing that I wanted to be able to help them more. I wanted to know, how can I really help with mental health and understand more about mental health? Because it was something that I felt wasn't really talked about much in the church. So soon I started feeling like God was calling me to go into mental health counseling. And then thankfully I found a school that actually integrated Christian spirituality and faith and mental health counseling. So I felt like God was really leading me there. And so then that's what started my journey.
Oh my goodness. So I noticed that in your bio. I'm like, oh, that little triangle. That is so fascinating that you're able to study all of that. But I want to ask you, why do you think churches don't talk about mental health or anxiety that much?
I think it's because when it comes to mental health in general, a lot of people still hold a stigma around it, think it's for crazy people or
Mm,
thinking that they don't really need it. And in the church particularly, I think there's still a stigma of what it means spiritually for you. That a lot of times people may think that it means that they're failing as a Christian or their faith is not strong enough and something is wrong. So people don't want to talk about it because they probably don't want to be seen as the Christian that's struggling with their faith or lacking in their faith. So there's not much discussions on it. And many times, some people I know, they will be told they just to pray more. And that's all they need to do. And then they wouldn't get other type of more tangible help on how to really improve their mental health.
all right. So that part that you just said, we just need to pray more. I think sometimes as Christians, we're all like, well, it's either because I'm not praying enough or not reading my
Mm,
Bible enough. Yeah.
mm.
So let's just ask the question, is anxiety a spiritual failing?
I would say definitely not. It can impact your spiritual life, but I wouldn't say it's a
Mm,
spiritual failing. Many people who I speak to are praying and they are reading their Bibles, and then that's what causes frustration because they're like, well, I was told to do these things more and it would change. And then when things are still a struggle, they're wondering what's going on, what's wrong with me. But the truth is, many times it's just things going on in your life that maybe you need to pay attention to. And it doesn't necessarily mean that something is failing in your spiritual life. Maybe there's another area that you really need to look into so that the anxiety can really start to minimize and really be a
oh, that's so good. So how prevalent do you think anxiety is?
I would say very much so prevalent. It is one of the most common mental health illnesses. And I believe statistics say that about 30% of adults will experience some type of anxiety disorder at some point in their life. And that's just speaking of anxiety disorder. Sometimes some people might experience anxiety, maybe not to that degree. Many people experience anxiety and never get the help they need. So I wouldn't be surprised if that number is actually much higher than what statistics can really show. And like I said, it is one of the most common mental health illnesses because anxiety is dealing with a lot of worries and fears that I think naturally every human being will go.
Yes. Yes. That right there. I think that's true. I think I told you before, like, that is probably the most significant difference between me and my husband is
Mm.
I don't think he knows what anxiety is. And I'm just like, how can you be a human being and not? So that's why I'm of the opinion that, yeah, I bet I bet there's a lot out there because it seems like almost everybody else I talk to, they will admit to either situational anxiety or generalized anxiety about something or dealing with anxiety in some form. So what is causing the anxiety?
I would say there are a few factors that causes people to have anxiety. One is their family upbringing and DNA. Most of the time, if you have a family with anxiety, you're probably going to pick it up as well. And sometimes you pick it up behaviorally. So if you grow up in a home where people were showing their anxiety, very worried, talking about their worry, or sometimes when an individual grow up with a very strict parent who's very worried about their safety and have a tight grip, many times you
Mm.
will pick up that same type of anxiety that your parents had. And also, I would say the day to day. Many times we're worried about our finances, our jobs, positions at our jobs. Are we doing well? Our children, and our family. The day to day can also bring up some anxiety as well. And lastly, I would also say social media. Social media and the rise of social media has also caused many anxiety because people are comparing themselves to others a lot more, feel like they need to perform in a way. And because we're comparing ourselves to people's, like they say, highlights, we start to question our own lives and then it gives us anxiety as if we're not doing enough. So there's many factors I think goes into anxiety, but those are some of the most common ones. Our family upbringing, sometimes it can be genetics, social media, the things around us, and of course, all of the above.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, I would definitely say that social media doesn't help anxiety, you know? So, I mean, it's like you scroll through it, because you're bored. So you pick up your phone and you're scrolling through things, but then you're just struck by so many randomness. Like for me, I found it very, very helpful to delete news apps off my phones. I am like, I do
Mm,
not need notifications about every little thing that's happening halfway across the world. And
that's true. That's really true. That's another thing that causes a lot of anxiety.
oh yeah, yeah. And so, but then I replaced some of that time with social media. I was like, well, that was not actually the very best trade.
That's very true.
Yeah, so now for me, I'm trying to be way more intentional about getting out, like going walking, listening to a podcast on a good topic, reading a book, but not replacing news with more social media.
Yes, that's true. Because the internet has given us so much more information that I think the human brain can really hold.
Oh,
People
yes.
many years before didn't have that. They just knew what was going on locally.
Yes, yes, and that was enough. Now it feels
Yeah.
I mean, like, literally, that was enough to worry about. And then we're like, "Oh, look, we can choose which part of the country we wanna worry about today." Okay, so tell me, when you're working with people, who do you work with the most?
I mostly work with adults,
Okay.
anyone 18 and older, but I would say
Mhm.
I work with predominantly a lot of young adults and mostly
Mm.
predominantly women.
Yeah. So the title of this episode is Create an Anxiety Plan. So let's talk about this anxiety plan. First of all, how can an anxiety plan help someone who's struggling with anxiety?
I would say it can help someone because majority of the time when we're in a fearful situation or a stressful situation, we will go back to our habits. So if our habit is to avoid, then that's what we're most likely going to do. So in order to not avoid or to not deal with the situation the way you have been that hasn't been working for you, it's best to create a plan. So to create a plan on exactly how are you going to challenge this behavior? How are you going to challenge the thoughts that's feeding the behavior? Because most of the time we have anxious thoughts as well. That's causing us to avoid. So creating a plan can really help us to be intentional about how are we going to really change and challenge these anxious thoughts, challenge these behaviors. Like we see many times in other areas of our life. If you're not used to going to the gym, a lot of times you're not going to get up and just go to the gym randomly one day. You would have to plan out, like figure out which gym you're actually going to go to, how far it is, how you're going to get there, clothes, do you have clothes to wear, getting your clothes prepared. And because you have that all planned out, you're more likely to do it. And with the anxiety plan, it's the same thing. Try to create a plan of, okay, what do I need to change about the way I think? And how do I need to start thinking differently in a more healthy way? And what are the behaviors that I want to start to implement, and talking myself through it? Because many times we're still going to feel a bit anxious, but as we talk ourselves through it, many times we can get ourselves to do those things that we're fearful about.
That is so good. Like thinking about, I don't want to use the word attacking anxiety because that sounds very anxious sounding, but improving maybe your anxiety with a plan, just like you'd improve your physical health with a gym plan, improving with the plan aspect. I just love that concept because it just feels like it's so much more concrete than just something like, I just need to like not be so anxious. That's just so vague and you don't know how to like work at that. But with a plan, it's like, oh, so how do we create an anxiety plan?
Well, I would say we can create one with a journal. Journaling is something that I often encourage my clients to do. And in fact, I do have a free thought journal that I offer to anyone who's interested in it to download. In the thought journal, what I do is I help guide you to process your thoughts. So what are those negative thoughts that's leading to my anxiety or increasing my anxiety? Process the emotion as well. But sometimes it could be other emotions that's involved, and being able to put a name to it and really understand it can also give us more information. And then writing down the behaviors. What behaviors is this leading to? And then at the end of the journal, working towards what are the new behaviors that I want to implement, and how do I need to think in order to implement this new behavior? And then I encourage the client at the end to repeat it, because repetition is very important when it comes to teaching ourselves new ways of thinking and new ways of doing things.
Oh, that's so good. So yeah, that sounds amazing. You said that's free? You have a free thought
A free
journal?
thought journal. Yes.
Okay. All right. I'll make sure I get the link for you guys for that. So that'll be in the show notes. That's amazing. All right. So tell us about somebody you've helped. Like, do you have a success story about somebody you've helped deal with their anxiety?
Yes, I would say I've had many success stories of helping people with social anxiety, other types of phobias or generalized anxiety. Even me myself, I was someone who grew up with social anxiety. And over the years, I started learning how to challenge that anxiety and to place it with healthier thoughts. And when I was growing up, and this was before I even ever went to therapy, when I
Oh,
started
wow.
learning more about psychology and learning more about therapy, I realized that my Christian faith, because this was really something that my Christian faith was what led me to many of the things that I started to do. And then when I started learning more about psychology, I started realizing, oh, this is a lot of things I learned from the Bible. And that's one of the reasons why I often tell people that psychology is just catching up with God, because a lot of times what I started learning, we read it in the Bible, such as in Romans chapter 12, verse 1-2, saying, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And there's a lot of forms of psychology that teaches us that changing the way we think is very crucial to changing who we are or changing our behaviors and the things that's harming us. And so as I was growing up and I was reading that really stood out to me. That really stood out to me, the Bible telling us that we have to change the way we think. And reading in 1 Timothy chapter 2, reading that the Lord does not give us the spirit of fear, but a love, power, and a sound mind. I'm like, okay, so God wants to help us without fear. And he's not expecting us to get rid of it, because if he was, then he wouldn't tell us often to take courage. So he knows that we are going to be fearful sometimes, and he's telling us to have courage. So there was a lot of places in the Bible I started to really focus on and see, okay, how can I apply this to my life? And one of the other ones that stood out to me was, I believe it's in Philippians chapter 3, where it talks about pressing towards the mark of the upward call of God in Christ. And that kind of kept me moving in a forward motion. And so in a way, I kind of started just doing my own exposure therapy from what I was
Oh
reading
my
in the Bible,
gosh.
because I started noticing that God is telling me to change my thoughts, to challenge what I'm thinking, and keep moving forward. So a lot of times when I would notice that my fear is holding me back, I would challenge myself to say, okay, how do I do it anyway? So I would challenge myself to do it anyway. And then when I got on the other side, I realized I was okay. It wasn't as bad as it seemed. And most of the time it's not. But we sometimes also forget to remind ourselves of that. And a lot of times when we do challenge ourselves to do the things that we're fearful of, it's important to affirm ourselves in that way. Kind of give ourselves a little pat in the back, say we did it and we got through it, and knowing that the next time we could do it again. So I started learning how to do these things for myself. And then I started noticing over time, my social anxiety became less and less. Now I can go to social events and speak up for myself a lot more than I was able to when I was a child.
You said so many great, great things. And I realized my mom did that for me, like when I was a kid. I remember as a teenager wanting to grab onto her skirt and hide behind her
Mm.
skirt. Just having that mental picture in my head of like, I don't want to do this. And she's like, April, I need you to go into Walmart and return this thing to the customer service. And she just didn't let me off the hook, but she wasn't mean about it either. She was just like, this is something you'll need to do. And so I just screwed up my courage and did it and lived through it and came back. And that was the realization that, oh, once you do the thing, that you can do the thing. Like,
Yeah.
that I lived through this. It wasn't comfortable. And
Mm.
so, yeah, her doing that, challenging me, made those are the things that I look back on every time, even now. It's like, once I do this thing, I'll know that I can do this thing. And I still to this day, hate doing new things. Hate it.
Mm.
One, but I've got this really, really strong belief that on the other side, if there's something that I want, then it'll be worth the effort. Those two passages you talked about, love those.
Mm.
And I wanted to also say another one that I love is perfect love casts out fear. And so when you're talking about the thoughts and then creating the feelings of fear, and
Mhm.
sometimes to step out of it, it's like I use that verse to ask myself, what is it about this that I love so much that I'm willing to do it scared?
Mm.
And then that kind of gets me to that courage step that you talked about on the pressing on, and then, yeah, seeing the result on the other side.
That's
Yeah.
very true. I very much so agree with that. I think that when it comes to love, it's very important with casting out the fear, because even when we just have that love for ourselves and what it is, like you said, that we want to do, and knowing that it's better for us, or sometimes even knowing that it's better for another person. Sometimes we're very fearful of doing something, but it can actually be a very loving kind thing for them. So it's like, how do we build the courage for that also? So I do
Yes.
feel like love many times, when that's the focus, it can really make us do the things that we're fearful of.
Yes. Yes. I've never felt so courageous as when I had little kids and I was doing things for their sake. So those were the times when I was really like, oh, I'm willing to do this for their sake.
Mm.
Because sometimes for my sake, I'm
Yeah.
like, it's not that important to me. Okay. Let's just talk a little bit honestly for a second of what are the downsides of not dealing with anxiety?
I think some of the downsides could be a lack of peace, a lack of joy, stress. Many times too, it can keep us from pursuing our dreams and goals and really finding and enjoying our purpose in life. And it can really keep us from enjoying many different things. So I think there are a lot of downsides to anxiety, and where we do not really work on minimizing it and dealing with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I know for me, like if I gave in to the anxiety and did not work with it and work through it, my life would be really, really well, we wouldn't have this podcast. So there wouldn't be this
Yes.
podcast. I wouldn't have most of my friends.
Mm.
Yeah. I would have most of the great things that I have in my life. I just love how your message is so much. This is not a spiritual failing. There might be really valid reasons why your anxiety started. And I can look back in my own life and see whether it's nature or nurture or just the pace of life today or what it is. It just is what it is. Like,
Mhm.
it doesn't have to stay this strong. Like,
Yeah.
it just it doesn't have to be the thing that stops you.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might slow me down a little bit if I'm comparing myself to somebody else, but comparing myself to somebody else is a great way to increase anxiety too, I hear.
Mm. That's true.
Okay. So, do you help people create anxiety plans?
Yes, I do. Many
Okay.
times in my practice, when I'm doing my one-on-one work, I would do a plan with my client. Usually it starts with what they call an anxiety hierarchy. So really understanding what are the different fears we have. And then we choose like
Hmm.
one to start with and start mapping out a plan of exactly what steps you can start to take. Where do you get stuck? And then start analyzing, okay, what are you thinking at that moment where you start to really get stuck and get hindered? And then we start working on together, okay, what are some other messages that you can send to yourself and say to yourself repetitively to create a new one of the
Yeah.
things that psychology speaks about is neuroplasticity, and that we have the power to change the neurons in our brain, which holds these messages. So we don't have to keep those thoughts. And a lot of times we feel like it's been with us for so long, like that it's a part of us, but we can change them if we want to. And God has given us the ability to do that. So we try to work on, okay, what do we want to replace? And then I guide them through the behaviors, seeing, okay, what behaviors do you want to, because you don't want to do a behavior that's going to bring on a level 10 anxiety to start.
Oh, yeah.
Because that would just work against you. So you definitely want to start with something that's challenging, but not too challenging where you run away, but also not too easy where it's like, okay, that wasn't really a challenge at all, because then you're not really learning anything. So really trying to find that sweet spot, and then I help walk them through and then encourage them to do it at least 4 times in a week. So
Mm.
when it comes to anxiety, it's very important, and many things when it comes to changing our thoughts, it's important to have that repetition. It said statistics say that it takes about 21 days to change a habit. So usually I would encourage clients to at least give it that before
Mm.
any judgments, because sometimes we judge ourselves so harshly and expect there to be some ups and downs, some days that's better than others. But giving yourself that time and that repetition to really start to see the change, and giving yourself that grace as well, because sometimes we need to give ourselves grace when we're working towards these things.
That right there. Give ourselves grace while we're working towards these things. Yeah. I love the idea of the neuroplasticity of the brain, the idea that we are not hardwired. I mean,
Mhm.
we might be kind of hardwired a little bit,
Mhm.
but it can be rewired. And I always think of that saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And it's like, that's not in the Bible, people.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Bible talks about renewing our mind. So
Yes.
obviously we can do it if it's there. So, oh, it's so good. But yes, that part, I think people really do beat themselves up like, I tried and it didn't work. But it's like,
Yeah.
but did you try at least 21 days in a row? Did you try at least 20
Mhm.
times? Did you try? How many times did you try? And I remember, I don't know if I told you this story, but the very first time that I tried to create a video, I opened up my laptop and I recorded myself for 2 minutes and I'm like, "This is horrible," and I slammed my laptop shut, and I'm just like, "I will never do that again." And then
I
it
understand
was
that.
about 4 months later and COVID had hit, but I'm like, "Oh my
Mm.
goodness, if I'm going to help people as a coach, I'm gonna have to get on social media
Mm.
and do videos." And so what I did was I said, "Okay, I'm gonna do a Facebook Live every single day for 30
Oh, wow.
days, and I have to do it before I eat lunch, like, before I
Mm.
eat, because I don't eat breakfast, so I'm gonna have to do it before I
Oh.
eat lunch." So it's like, do the video or get really hungry. Yeah, but that's because I did know that after the 30th time, it'll be so much easier than it
Mm.
was the first time. And now I'm telling you, if somebody says, "Hey, you wanna do a video?" It's like, "N yeah, of course, not a problem," because 'cause I've done so many now. Now I'm just like, "Oh, just another day in the office." If you struggle with anxiety, get yourself an anxiety plan.
Yes. Definitely. That could
Yeah.
definitely be helpful for anxiety.
All right. So, where can they find more about you?
You can check me out on Instagram. I do have some content on there at Adrien Therapy. That's Adrien Therapy. And I also have a website, adrientherapy.com, where you can download the free thought journal and also check out other content that I have, and even book a session with me if you like.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, listen, everyone, we'll put those links in the show notes. So if you're listening to it on Spotify or Apple iTunes, it'll be in the notes. And so that you can find those links. Christina, this has been I think so helpful for the audience to think about anxiety as not something that's a permanent state but something that we can make a plan around to improve and to make our life better on the other side. So, any final thoughts?
Yes. The only other thing that I would want to add is that you said that was very important is especially when you was telling the story about your mom and how she encouraged you to do things that were fearful for you. And you said that you were terrified, but you did it and got on the other side. And I think that's another important thing to know is that you're going to have to just do it scared. Because most of the time we're waiting also and expecting sometimes even the therapy to make the anxiety go down first before we can do these things. But many times you just have to learn how to do it scared. And then as you experience, the more you do it, that's when you'll start to realize it's not as fearful and then you're more comfortable in it afterwards.
Yeah. And I do know this having somebody by your side while you're doing it scared helps. So
Mm.
like having a therapist, like, or in my case, my mom saying, hey, you can do this, the encouraging voice of having somebody walk with you through the scary when you're trying to push yourself into a thing that feels a little bit scary. And
Mhm.
I recommend, I highly recommend it, people. All right. This has been great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So,
Thank you for having me.
all right. Bye-bye, y'all.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Brag About Life. If you're interested in more, come check out aprilbragg.com. That's APRILBRAGG.com. See you next week.